the word institution is so fitting because it's a broad, sweeping term that
I mean,
encompasses all of that. That
they use
is
that
the
term
straw man
themselves.
against Scripture. Yeah.
They use that term themselves. They call it an institution, and they say it's God's institution, but it's really man. And you see, even God using language like that. God mocks people at times. Why do you think it exists? You know, he invented it. It's used
Well, and that's
in
like
a
in Job.
specific.
In Job, he was like, "Can you
do this?
Can you create the behemoth? Can you save yourself with your own writing?"
You know what God said? Can you bind him on a leash for your maidens? Can you put a leash on him for your ladies? Like,
now that was the unicorn, which has been for the last year my favorite animal.
The rhino, pretty awesome.
No, not the rhinoceros.
The unicornus.
The prehistoric beast that's like the size of an 18-wheeler.
Or Micah, not Micah, Malachi chapter 2, God's talking to his priests, and he said, I will take the dung of your solemn assemblies and spread it in your face.
Oh boy.
Like, that's God speaking.
Guys, can we quickly
blowing it out of your hand?
Can we quickly go back just real quick, restate what we were talking about, double down on it real quick just for the record. Sorry.
Wait, did you get everyone's did we all sign a waiver?
This is the internet. There's no rules. I'm kidding.
Are we going to be financially compensated? Let me get my lawyer.
I will corrupt your seed and spread dung upon your faces, even the dung of your solemn feasts, and one shall take you away with it. And I think there's almost a similar kind of tone, like when God in Psalms 50, he's like, you thought I was altogether such an one as yourself, but I will reprove you and set these things in order before your eyes. You thought I was like
taking the holy things of the Most High and profaning them amongst the world, making them common.
That's what people do with so much stuff, about premarital sex and fornication. They've taken a holy thing from God, spat on it, stomped on it, profaned it into something common.
I did want to say too, like this just popped in my head, and I just wanted to say it real quick that because earlier we were talking about like the law, and that to a legalist, the law is legalism. Go ahead. And
I gotta head out of here, so I love y'all.
You're good. In Isaiah 28, there's this repetition of precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, like cutting a little bit out there. But then it gets repeated. So it says like to you or to the young babes, taken like freshly taken away from the milk, I give you this, and it's like it's the secret or the source code to the kingdom of heaven, which would then be like that of Scripture. But then it goes on to repeat it and says, but to the others, like I would, and I don't have it right in front of me, but it then quotes the exact same thing. And what's interesting is like that quotation, when I was reading it last, it just jumped out at me, like to the Spirit-filled, member of the kingdom of heaven, the Levite, the priest, you have precept upon precept, and it builds this kingdom and this understanding of the Most High that's irrefutable. But then to the legalist who is not of the kingdom of heaven, possibly part of an assembly, but like as Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 14, the unbeliever, and equating that with the untaught. Doesn't matter if you've been an unbeliever and an attender for 30 years, yet the unbeliever. It is quotation marks, precept upon precept, line upon line, and you will stumble backwards. And it's the exact same verbiage to the member of the kingdom of heaven. It is the power of the Most High, but to the legalist, to the pretender, it is legalism. It's dirty, nasty, old, wicked, defunct, rotten legalism. The exact same Scripture. And then I was considering, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead, Marcel.
The only difference about reading word by word, line by line, and all that from a legal point of view and from a spiritual point of view is the heart. There's really like if God hasn't changed the heart of the person, they wouldn't be able to see, oh, there's value in this because God did that. But if the heart isn't changed yet, well, of course, it's not gonna be seen as having value, and it's gonna be seen as something common. So that's how I see
Yeah,
it.
it's like to to us, it is value because it is understanding of the most precious things. But to the
Mhm.
legalist, like think about a lawyer, like, all right, how can I profit from this? How can I use this to prosecute against someone else for the sake of my benefit?
Mhm.
That's the concept of legalism. And then with legalism in mind being referenced towards works, it then brings to mind the parable of the wedding feast,
Mm.
where you have the people who are showing up are the people who weren't on the original guest list. The people that were, on the street corners and throughout town that were specifically not on the invite list, they're invited in, and then the individual who doesn't have his clothing of righteousness from the Messiah, it is like,
Mhm.
hey, the sovereign addresses him as a friend and says, hey friend, how is it that you're not dressed properly? Where we have to understand that the expectation of these individuals wouldn't be
Mhm.
that they may necessarily have this righteousness, or that they would have this righteousness, these clothes on them, but they would get them, and that they were provided for them.
Mhm.
That's how you get them, is that they're provided to you. And then when
Yeah.
he says, so that's also a picture of judgment. So like, how is it? Because on Judgment Day, when you're judged, I like, if you've ever been to a courtroom, it's usually kind of noisy, especially depending on how many people are there, and you always hear all these people trying to make their defense. But on the day of final judgment, there will be no defenses. There will be no like, oh well this or well that, because he'll say, how is it, friend, that you came to not be clothed in righteousness? And those people will be speechless because they will have been given every opportunity. So then the works winds up not being a matter of something that you can just pull out of your closet and bring, but it's something we have to go get. The thief on the cross, he was practically handed his righteousness in that moment. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, it's awesome because he ask, like, I think he asked Jesus. That's why he got in.
Yeah.
It's basically just ask.
Will you give me your
Man,
clothes of
Eric,
righteousness? For sure, here they are.
honestly, actually, that guy is probably the actual example for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So first time I heard it was Solo talking, but he talked about how basically the two thieves on the cross were the two types, the sheep and the goats.
Mhm.
The one was a sheep, the other was a goat. Like, oh, prove yourself to me, take yourself down here, and rescue us all, and then we'll worship you, basically.
I mean,
But on the day of judgment, that one will
I would
be
say both.
speechless.
I would think both were goats, and just one of them was like, "Can I be a sheep?"
Yeah,
Like sort of a moment.
right.
So
Since Alvaro has the tapes rolling, and it probably won't sound the same way, but um, you wanted me to go over the third commandment.
Yeah.
The third commandment being, quoting KJV here, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, right? And that basically, in very much in the same way that the Catholic Church saw fit to remove the second commandment of you shall not fashion an image out of stone or earth or wood, any image on heaven or in the sea or the birds of air above, and bow down to it, right? Talking about fashioning an image. Well, the Catholics just conveniently pulled that out, and then I want to say that they split the covet. You shall not covet. So you're not to commit adultery. You're also not to covet your neighbor's wife. You're also not to covet your neighbor's things, like his house. Well, in the very same vein or manner that the Catholics did that, the rest of the institutions seem to have changed the definition and therefore effectively removing the third commandment, which is a matter of you shall not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. They changed the meaning, which is the same thing as removing it, to you can't say irreverent things by being cavalier with the quote name of God, where ultimately the name of God is the identity. If you go everywhere in Scripture and see where it says name of God, if you rotate that with image, identity, character, it actually, I would argue that it fits better, at least with like my understanding of language.
Against
So,
his character.
well, you don't take his name, and ultimately instead of thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, you would say thou shalt not brandish, carry with, advertise the identity of the Lord your God in vain for false purposes.
I mean, that works too, but that's even more like clear. And they still don't.
What that goes against. Yeah, what that goes against is membership, right? Because membership is largely equated with salvation inside of the institution. And so it's actually very self-indulging to change that meaning, because otherwise it would stand as an indictment of those who would quickly sweep people into membership using whichever spells are necessary to convince the individual that they have satisfied Scripture in name alone, but not really in deed or true belief. So if you revert it to that appropriate meaning, you shouldn't take the name in vain. Then you should be able to go through the institution and say this person has vainly appropriated the name, so this person needs to be like removed, right? And then you start going through removal processes. But what that does is goes against the financial bottom line of that corporation, which is the institution, which operates as a business and is almost solely based these days upon financial measures.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm like,
so then they go around saying like, oh, well, you can't say JC, you can't say Jiminy Cricket, you can't say gosh darn it, and like euphemisms become euphemisms. You can't say these things because that violates the third commandment. That is profaning his commandments. That's blasphemy. No one wants to look at it that way. And then when you think about in Luke, go ahead.
Wait a sec. I have someone asking me something. I'll be right back.
Okay. So we look at Luke, I want to say it's around 10 or 13. The Messiah is saying, which among you would build a tower without first calculating the cost, and how embarrassing would it be if you started to build this tower and realizing you hadn't basically enough provision to complete the tower. That is a reference to people taking on the name for vain purposes, but not making enough provision or caring enough or having enough foresight to consider actually being able to facilitate what they're asked to do, which is to be righteous.
I'm guilty of that.
After salvation. What's that?
I'm guilty of that, but in a corporate logic. It's for schooling. Like I didn't do enough provisions in order to fill all the homeworks. So I felt really bad. Anyways,
no, that's the same parable as the tower, right? You weren't able to complete it. And then what are we trying to complete? Well, Paul talks about it being like a race, right? Where most people, and when you look at the institutional format, how it's organized around celebrating the day one experience, this experience of salvation, and then recycling it and perpetrating it. And all we do is focus on day one. You got your day one? How sure are you about your day one? You want to do your day one again? But there's never a day two or a day three. So it's like if you guys ever saw the movie Groundhog Day, like every single day you wake up and you don't progress forward, you regress back to the previous day. And that's when you have people that go back and they're crucifying the Messiah over and over and over again because they aren't actually walking in that salvation. Go ahead.
weird because it's actually a saved progress. So
Yeah.
people need to recognize that that was done. That was done. Okay. Okay. Time to
I've
get
gone so
sanctified.
far as to say, yeah, I've gone so far as to say in an institutional environment that day one is like, they want to say, and this is like a sacrilegious thing to say, is that day one ceases to become important on day two. All they want to do is celebrate day one. Honestly, it's very much reminiscent of the Hebrews, that like they make their festivals and their celebrations more important than the purpose of the Most High that those things are supposed to be in honor of. And they take those festivals and those new moons and those Sabbaths and they make them about themselves instead of the Most High. So it's not to profane the things of the Most High. It's not to profane the sacrifice that saves us from that original contract, but it is to point out that on day two, you can't go back and relive day one. Day two becomes the most important day. And whatever day you're on, whatever subsequent day you're on, is the most important day, which then, from their perspective anyways, they should understand makes that day one experience that they keep on trying to live over and over and over again, trying to recreate these salvation experiences that they might have perceived when they were children, just trying to, say the same words over and over again. And like, well, I want to get baptized again. Well, I want to go and like the concept of, they use this key phrasing, rededicate your life, because otherwise
Because
you would have to
addictions
admit,
do that.
go ahead.
It's funny because addictions do that. Like
Interesting.
people seek a feeling, not the actual thing, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they want to relive, they want to get that experience. It's experience hunting,
But I
right?
kind of get it. It's it's like finally something work, so they're trying to redo something that actually worked,
But it
but
kind of
it's not. Yeah, go.
revivals.
What is it?
Revivals. When people say, we need a revival. They all gather around and then they'll basically have this event that they worship God. The whole event is what I've seen mainly centered around feelings. They're chasing this high. And they even admit to themselves, oh yeah, don't get caught up in the high. Caught up in the high. So they realize the high that most of them get, for
It's
events
so
or these,
funny.
what is it called? Like a
I just
conference. They'll
need
have a
something.
conference, right? Get a high off of it. They go back to living their life.
Yeah, like same old next day. Well, I know Marcella gets on to me for my semantics here, but revival is not bad. But the fact that in practice revival has come about to mean something completely different. What they're actually saying is, what we need, guys? We need a new moon festival. We need to celebrate ourselves in a new moon festival, and that will make us feel like we're doing more, that we're actually progressing. We need more. We need like some super Sabbaths. We need some festivals. All the things that God says He's going to take away in
For
judgment
Sabbaths.
in Hosea. Yeah, but like the Sabbath, not His Sabbath, not His concept of rest, not resting in Him, but like, so if you look at
Resting in
Isaiah,
him is like the ultimate. So why? Anyways,
no, but in Isaiah, you'll have, if you pay attention, it'll say your Sabbaths and my Sabbaths. So He will condemn your Sabbaths, and He will say, but if you would just turn your foot back from my Sabbath, then all of these wonderful things will happen. But your Sabbath is what you have profaned His Sabbath into, and that's where that contrast is. But they're not right next to each other. You have to like hit the entire book to really see that contrast. You have to search these things out and chew on them, which to the unclean hog, the swine, that might be able to divide a little bit, but can't or won't chew on it. They cannot. How do you say? They cannot retain or obtain any nutrient from these things. And they'll go and you'll have people talking about like, oh, I've read the Bible cover to cover 18 times. But as a hog, so it just passes straight out of the backside with no nourishment.
I get you. It's like it's funny because even our body does that. Uh, like if it cannot like dismantle a molecule, it'll turn it into fat. So it's
Or pass it.
Or pass it, yeah. So that's interesting. So
well, and that's the unclean animals are like types of non-believers, and then the clean animals are types of believers. And the two correlating characteristics of a clean animal is that it both divides, has a divided hoof, and that it chews on the word. It chews the cud, which is a slow and deliberate process.
Yeah, but what about eagle?
That's exactly how I work.
What was that question?
What about eagles and hawks?
Are you talking about like birds of the air?
No,
I heard eagles. I didn't hear the other one. Hawks.
Hawks and eagles.
Yeah, are those not the birds of the air?
I mean, these are birds, but the eagles are symbolized as prophets, and the hawks, I forgot what hawks are symbolized, but they're not like symbolized as demons.
Okay, so maybe scavenger, the scavenger concept of the birds of the air winds up being the evil personifications. That makes sense. I haven't seen that correlation, but I mean, if you think about like hawks being able to see so far, and the concept of, and I heard this today as well, talking about being in God's army. But when we look at what we're actually equated to, we're equated to more often as watchers.
That's like what I think when I think of a hawk.
Yeah. Actually, you want to see something cool? Hold up a second.
I mean, it makes me think of the satellites too, because it like people legit have satellites out, so we have GPS and all the shenanigans for deliveries and knowing where our puppies are when they get lost. So.
Check this out. I've seen a hawk near a rainbow. Hold up.
Alvaro, while you're looking that up, Alvaro, did that cover everything, or was there another thing you wanted to address?
So far,
there was something about euphemisms that I think I didn't come after, but
unless you want to go, like, I think you guys mentioned.
Oh yeah, like, so not only will they say like, oh, don't take the name of God in vain, and that means to not say JC or Lord Almighty or whatever as an expression, which is again completely covered by other things. And one of the things I didn't say that I'd said before was that Nadab and Abihu are perfect examples of that, of approaching, so Aaron's sons in Leviticus 10, approaching God irreverently, where Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were actually appropriating or brandishing the identity of the Most High for vain and self-gratifying purposes, being, as the scripture says, sons of Belial, sons of the devil, sons of evil, the whole while, profaning the things of God. And then when we look at the remedy for the first, Hophni and Phinehas, Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus 10, you know, the remedy is do not mourn for these two, because then my wrath will fall upon the entire assembly. But then they went through the entire, following on, they went through the entire process of the Day of Atonement and putting the sin onto the scapegoat and sending it off as a matter of satiating his wrath. And he said, do not mourn their loss, but or else my wrath will fall on the entire assembly. But rather the entire assembly should mourn that my wrath has been kindled. Well, we don't have that in Eli's story in Samuel. And so what happens is his wrath does fall on the entire assembly. Like tens of thousands of people fall in battle. His sons, the sons are slain, Hophni and Phinehas. Eli dies. He falls over blind, right? Because he was blind to the profanity and the blasphemy of his sons. And then the ark was lost, like the presence was lost for quite a while. And then when Uzzah pulls a a Nadab and Abihu and says, I'm going to help God out for my own purposes, or like God needs my help, he's struck dead. And they're bringing, like, all of these things are interconnected, where they're actually not even carrying the ark properly, because Levites should be carrying it. Levites should be like effectively brandishing the presence of God, but instead they put the ark on a cart, just like the Philistines sent it back to Israel in the first place. And so then basically there's a big series of sacrifices and another like reenactment of the Day of Atonement, when David finally brings the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem properly. I know it probably sounds like word salad, but all of those things
all
are.
in all, they had to bring the Ark of the Covenant where? To Jerusalem?
Back to Jerusalem. So like when Nadab and Abihu,
Hophni and Phineas. Also, minus 10 points for Boris.
brought the trinket, the totem, the appearance of God to the battle in Samuel, I want to say like 4 or 5, 1 Samuel 4 or 5. So they're violating that third commandment. They're brandishing the image, the identity of the Most High for false pretenses. He struck them down. They died. Eli died. They lost, Israel suffered and lost, and then they lost the covenant, or the ark, anyways, the Ark of Testimony. And then it didn't come back until like I want to say it was like the middle of 2 Samuel, and that's the story of I want to say it was Uzzah the Hittite, maybe, or Uzzah, anyways. He reached his hand out because the cart was going over rough terrain and it looked like it was going to fall over, and so he reached out with his hand. He stabilized. He touched, effectively, like profaned, approached the presence of the Most High improperly, irreverently.
Yeah, trying to hold up
God's anger.
Hold up the authority of God by his own strength.
Better said.
That's literally, his name means strength.
So when we look at that, we actually see, so not only is it two different things, but we also see that God's wrath was kindled against all of Israel because of the actions of Hophni and Phinehas. So they remedied it properly in Leviticus 10 with by not mourning them and going through the Day of Atonement, but they didn't remedy Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons. They didn't respond to that properly, and so God's wrath fell out over the entire assembly.
Yeah, because what happens is the priests are teaching a corruptness, and since the priests are sanctifying corruption, then all the people become corrupt, and then God is angry with everyone. But it always falls back to the priests.
Well, and that's a reference of headship,
Oh, because wait, repeat that, Solo. So
a similar picture is like when and this is a bit abstract, but it really is the same kind of a thing. Samson's wife is given to his companion, and she's defiled, but it flows downhill. Like, it's the priest's fault that the people are unclean because they're not doing their jobs. So God's mad at everyone, but it's the priest's fault. Like in the case of Eli's sons, they were wicked. They were profaning God.
Yeah, they were practically open, like they were known as sons of Belial.
Everybody got wrecked, sort of thing.
Yeah, but it was like something
as obtuse as making, like Jeroboam making the golden calves. Like they were very obtuse and open about it, and there was no correction for it. So we see what would have happened if they had mourned Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, and said, "Oh, this is horrible for us that we've lost these two people." We see what would have happened if they did that, because that's what happened with Eli's sons, and God's vengeance was poured out. And that's why, like, bringing the ark back to Jerusalem is then another. Unless you disagree, I'd like to hear it. Another depiction of the Day of Atonement, and
it is. Samuel does the job of Elijah, turns the people's hearts back, makes a sacrifice. They put away their idols, and he discomfits the Philistines with thunder, which is pretty important too. Kind of like the rain.
Extra resolution there.
The people are actually going up before God, instead of like they didn't do at Sinai. They didn't go.
So we were talking about the. Oh, go ahead.
It made me think about a testimony of a church that the head was, I think, committed adultery, and that they noticed that a lot of people that were attending had that sin too. So I'm just
Oh,
thinking.
yeah.
Well, that's a good example, though, of like to a legalistic people that doesn't know God, but views His law in His Scripture, His Word, as like an old, dead vestige of a thing past. Then, like they have no understanding of who God is, and it's just like when they didn't know how to move the ark, they didn't know how to, you would say, take or brandish the name as in the third commandment. If those people in that institution where the head stumbled were students of something like a book like Leviticus, they would realize, like, hey man, this kindles God's wrath against all of us. There's a specific sacrifice for when a leader stumbles, and that sacrifice, that sacrificial concept, should make everyone aware that you can't just put that person out of your midst and the problem goes away. But like everyone has to kind of mourn that God's wrath was kindled, such as in Leviticus 10. But no one has that wherewithal. No one has that understanding. And that's why we talked about this before. It seemed to be pretty prevalent in like November, is this concept of what's that scrupulosity, right? So and sometimes it's termed as moral scrupulosity. People who have a let's say an appearance of godliness, but like have no understanding of who God is. They run around in very much like a Hebrews 10 concept with this perceived sense of impending judgment and fire, but no understanding of how God operates to give them faith and comfort of either what they should be doing or what God will do. And so that ultimately lends to a sense of moral scrupulosity as people go around and they think that no matter what they can do, they'll never actually be saved because they have a false image of God to begin with, and they don't understand what that true image is, so they don't know how He behaves.
That's interesting.
From there, though, one of the things Alvaro mentioned was the concept of swearing. It's another thing that largely institutionally you'll hear is like, oh, don't swear. And then they'll correlate swearing to saying corrupt communications. Like, so Paul says, let no, not that he's the first person to say it, but let no foul or corrupt communication proceed from your lips. That is the concept of the colloquial swearing. Oh, don't swear. What does that mean? Don't say this word, don't say that word. These words are all bad. Right. Curse words or swear words. But in reality, the scripture says don't swear falsely. Do not whore your testimony out for the sake for vain purposes, for the sake of profit, right? But have a clean testimony, a testimony of truth. But all these things are misunderstood by the institution, which as a legalist would know best how to look at things legalistically. All the while claiming, no, we're anarchists. We have no law that governs us.
I think it fits more with the idea of gossiping in the sense of like foul language to affect someone's reputation. That would make more sense than just noticing you did a mistake in saying a swear word. Like, that's fine. In my book, it's like you're honest with yourself moment. So I'm not hard on people for swear words. I mean, I'm only hard on myself because I'm like how I came to not want to say swear words is basically I noticed it wasn't constructive for me, so I just didn't use them. It was that simple. And I was playing hockey when that happened. So I was like people would use swear words a lot to speak, and I was like, nah, I'm good.
Oh, where's my League of Extraordinary Gentlemen gif? Yeah, when Captain Nemo says they like these guys pull these guns on Captain Nemo, and they said, "Draw your weapon," or "Pick up that gun," or something like that, and he draws his sword and says, "I walk a different path."
Yeah, exactly. That's yeah.
Because
So
that's what we do. We walk a different path,
yeah.
literally.
Well, everybody has a different path. That's the thing. Like I'm always super aware of that, and sometimes I forget. I have moments, but yeah.
You know how they say all roads but one lead to Rome. Is that how they say it? Little
All
joke.
uh, well, the difference with
Now,
Rome and
the
Christ
saying is
is
all roads lead to Rome, but
yeah,
there's one that doesn't.
like every path leads to Rome, and I'm like, God can be in every path. Just He'll strengthen it up and lead it to Him. So, so instead of
Maybe better said, you can take the path. Yeah, you can take the path to the kingdom at any point on the journey, no
yeah,
matter what road you're on. But it is a different path.
yep, yep. Oh, I took my time listening to testimonies. I think I watched too many videos because of that. uh, like of the most like noisy ones to the more I came out of satanism once. Oh man, God really gets them from everywhere.
Especially in the last 2 years or so. There seems to be a high proclivity of people being drawn out of everywhere, like inexplicably.
I mean, I think it's constant. It's just because there's so many people that we notice it more. But yeah, that's I really see it. Like if you notice, you'll see the other stuff. This is basically if you won't
It could be.
notice, you never knew about it.
It
So
could have been where I was looking beforehand,
yeah,
because that was my type frame as well. So maybe it's just that my eyes are open. I'm able to see more. But it seems like
yeah.
everyone that I bump into,
Mm.
or a large percentage of everyone I bump into, it's always like, oh yeah, somewhere in between 2019 and now.
It really depends when God revealed it to people so they could actually see what's happening. So I mean, I see it that way because like everybody's blind about his works and not seeking him, so they're not gonna be noticing all those things. So yeah, I legit had a time of just I just want to be able to notice you, like things, and then now I'm more like, am I abiding? So that's where I'm at. Because it's I don't know if someone said it earlier, but it's the difference between knowing how he works and being in his works. There's a difference.
Say that last part again.
Like
The difference
actually,
between knowing him and knowing his word, or
well, I think it's the idea of believing in him versus abiding in him.
ah, I mean, I think that is kind of the consistent knowing God and knowing of God.
Yep.
And or like we hear in Isaiah, like those who would not incline their ear to me, like they can hear me, but they will not incline their
Mhm.
ear. And I think that's a beautiful word picture for listen, where a lot of people would say, like the difference between listening and hearing is a matter of splitting a hair and saying that each then separate part is a different hair. Well, ultimately, like you can hear something and not be paying attention to it or not care to pay attention to it, not care to understand it. And that's what we hear is like there are a lot of people who are hearers only, but then not doers would be the application of if you were inclining your ear, then you would be doers of the word also.
There, I find it tough because I had a hard time with that with my school. Like I always use like my experiences from like doing worldly things to how the heck am I gonna be able to abide if I'm having a hard time with this? Like I was having a hard time understanding things or noticing there's like I said before about semantics, like the teachers were like blasting so many words and I was like, oh boy, how do I do this?
Did I just hear a euphemism?
It's possible. I say,
Dang.
oh my goodness.
Oh, euphemism.
There you go.
I mean, but it's that like with the concept of sanctification, it's like we're comparing ourselves to the Messiah, who is effectively the instructor, the provider of our righteousness, and then like we do have a part to play, and I think this is a good opportunity to point out that like instead of free will, like the free won't concept, you see how you're different, and then you do through His power, you make changes to become more like, and the goal is to become a mirror image. And so we like I think that a lot of times the concept of righteousness is this whole state of you're now perfect once you've joined your institution, or like that gets pushed out a lot. But ultimately we see things along the way. No one can deny that you see things along the way and say like, oh, that's not a representation or a reflection of the Messiah. That's got to go. And what does He have there? I need that instead. And that's a matter of clothing ourselves in the Messiah.
I'll have to rehear that, but I'm gonna go for food. I'll be right back.
That thing earlier, Solo, was like the connection between Matthew 18 and then Leviticus 13, and then is in Deuteronomy about the you need like the, unless it's also in Leviticus needing a witness, like 2 or 3 witnesses to put someone to death.
Yeah.
But then one witness to overturn it. And so on the one hand, you've definitely got this priestly responsibility to understand what cleanliness is and what corruption or starts with an L, leprosy is, and then being able to decide, to judge and say like, this is unrighteousness, this is corruption, this is leprosy. But then the idea that the approach of, you confront the brother and then you come back with 2 or 3 witnesses, like in the law, or 1 or 2 witnesses to make 2 or 3, right? And then if that is unfruitful, if that doesn't bear fruit, which is also, there's like a 3-phase inspection period for the leprosy, then you take them before the entire assembly to then bring the matter under greater scrutiny. So now in front of the entire assembly, if there's not one person that can like lawfully say this person is not guilty of what they've been accused of, provide appropriate testimony, then they're cast out. But that 3-pronged approach is not only a matter of the inspection, but it's also the 2 or 3 witnesses for a case. It's 3 different confrontations to, like, in a sense, beg the person to be repentant. And if they're unrepentant, then they have a leprosy and they're cast out of the assembly. And then that isn't even a solid guarantee, because as long as they're alive, if the leprosy or the corruption goes away, then the priest will go outside of the camp. They don't just come waltzing back into the assembly, but the priest goes outside of the camp.
Yeah, I have to. I mean, just like a logical sense, you can't have somebody with a contagious skin disease coming in.
You go out and you're like protected, but there's then of course all the washings and you probably you have to wash and change out of your linens, and then change into your other clothes, go outside the camp, do the inspection, come back, and then you perform the cleansing ceremony. And then even after the person comes back into the assembly, they're not allowed to go into their own tent for 7 days. That it's not just like, oh, okay, leprosy's gone. It's like, yeah, 7 days. See if it sticks.
No, they have to be shut up and wait. The same thing happens in the flood of Noah. Remember, he sends out the bird, waits 7 days, sends it again.
Yeah, I remember that was like a beautiful connection.
Yep.
And it was a bird, so that, like with the cleansing ritual of which, oh man, I don't know how this escaped me, but the concept of okay. Look, I saw a couple dots connected, but this just hit me. Okay, so it wasn't just that, like, here is a precept for this Levitical thing. It was actually like Noah as the priest pronouncing the world clean and cleansed of all the wickedness it just washed away. That just hit me like a ton of bricks in the face.
Yeah, it's like God looking out the windows of heaven. His spirit going and looking.
3 times, 3 witnesses, three inspections.
But
Yeah.
God is patient.
Well, because on the final day, no one. That's why like in the parable of the wedding feast, the person was speechless, right? Because he'd been inspected 3 times, perceivably, in this. But by the time judgment comes around, he will have been inspected 3 times. He won't be able to say, "Oh, well, I didn't know," or "I didn't have." You were made known, and of course you didn't have, and therefore was provided for you.
Yeah, he always makes a thorough inspection. He did that before he destroyed Sodom, and he's doing it again before Jesus comes back too. Same thing. Inspecting the vineyard.
Well, and then you've got what I kind of maintain is that trimester concept. You've got 3 ages. Those 3 ages are the 3 inspection periods for all of time.
Maybe.
I don't want to sound like I'm jumping to conclusions here. That's just the way it.
So I learned something from school. No, I'm joking. No, it's funny that the school legit is about tests and checking the vineyard sort of thing. So I for fun I made the connection with that.
What was the first part about school?
It just noticing the similarities with how the school system works and how God inspects the vineyard. I just find it interesting. Like when it works well, it goes as if it's him inspecting. So it's interesting.
For sure. Alvaro, how you doing, man? You on bread and water over there? I don't know what that brie vein was in the cooking channel, but it was fun to watch.
This looks funny. Okay, I'm
You
gonna
say we are done with the.
Yeah, I think I gotta bounce and go tend to my my household. So I've got to pop off anyways. If you would send us a link though. I don't think I've seen your podcast. Send me a link.